Now, our next speaker is going to be talking to us about a very important topic. I mean, in today's society, everything seems so fast-paced. And as an example of that, how many of you have stood in front of a microwave willing it to go faster so that you can get your food? And that's just a symptom of today's society. And because of the fast pace of the society that we're in nowadays, often people end up stressed and burnt out. And our next speaker is going to talk to us about overcoming stress and burnout. It's Reverend David Shoshania. He's the owner of Paideia Training and Consultancy. He's a speaker, mentor, coach, with over 30 years of leadership experience nationally and internationally. And he would say he's passionate about helping individuals confront and dissolve self-imposed limitations that prevent them from realising their full potential and enjoying life to the full. And he wants people to discover their own personal wellness. And I had the privilege of hearing him speak recently. I found him to be funny, to be honest, and extremely encouraging. And so I know that you're going to enjoy what he's got to say to you today, and I'll welcome you up. And please put your hands together as we welcome him this morning.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Pastor Shala with the last presentation she gave, and she said that often people say this time next year that they intend to be. I'm on my way, and I've lost about a stone since then, I got up after and I said this time next year. So I think it will be in August next year. I'll present myself accordingly. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Dr. Tani and Dr. Wadukla for allowing me to come. During the worship, I kind of changed my presentation. You're going to get slides, but I'm going to share a few thoughts with you this morning that I think could help us, not just you, help us collectively in terms of overcoming burnout and avoiding burnout and overcoming stress. And I think sometimes our approaches to things like stress and burnout are quite superficial, that they deal with the symptoms rather than the cause. And during our time of worship, there's one of the things I do is we work a lot with organizations. So just last week we were working with some senior managers in the health service, exploring issues of inclusion and diversity. Sometimes we do leadership effectiveness, leadership development. Sometimes we do talent management. We do all sorts of different things working with organizations. And one of the things we try to do, we have a model which I haven't got here today. I usually put it up. I took it out. It's called the 3-5-4 model. We developed this model, and what we say to people is that each one of us have 5 dimensions, and that dimension, the 5 dimensions are knowledge, talent, skills, and we can have, we take actions and we take responsibility. We heard that this morning. So the 5 dimensions of our existence, if I can put it that way, is that we have knowledge, we have talents, we have skill, and that we take responsibility and we take action. Those are the 5 areas that professional development tends to focus on. But we say actually what's more important than the 5, if you want to put it, the 5 competencies or the 5 dimensions, is what we call the 3 core essences. And we say that's thoughts, emotions, and experiences. And what we teach when we go into organizations is that you can deal with the knowledge, skills, talent, responsibility, and action. But if you don't give due consideration to people's emotions, experiences, and thoughts, they will paralyze their ability to maximize those 5 dimensions. And so we try to go deeper rather than deal with the superficial stuff. And it's very interesting. We were dealing with a national health board, one of the biggest in the country. And we're working with them over a day, just exploring a number of issues. And one of the ladies there, who was on the board, said she was in London, and when she was in London, she saw an incident, a racial incident take place between one man and a group of men. And she said she became paralyzed as her husband went to intervene. You see where I'm going in a few moments. And we began to explore why she felt paralyzed. Because she said, in terms of her values and a value system, and in terms of her personal ethics, she believes in equality, but she didn't feel able to move. Then she told us a story, she told us a story earlier about being at home at the age of 7. And what she had at the age of 7 was a window cleaner. She lived in a quite racist area. And the window cleaner said to her mother when she was 7, why do you allow your children to go to school with these N words and these W words? And she said because her dad wasn't there, her mum and her just froze. Fast forward to this incident when she saw a man interacting with a group of men around the issue of race in East London. We began to explore how the correlation between what happened to her at 7 years old when she internalized racial dynamics from a position of powerlessness because she was a child and the man was an adult, affected the way as an adult who was a deputy CEO of a major health organization didn't have the emotional courage to deal with the situation that's before her. It wasn't about her competency. She was skilled in equality opportunities. She had knowledge, she had talent, she wanted to take responsibility, she had the instinctive response to try and take action, but actually her emotions and her thoughts and her experiences paralyzed her from doing it. Are you following that? Yeah. And she began to cry. And then we had a professor in the room who was one of the hospital's leading surgeons. And he began to talk about his guilt about being a professor. We asked him why. And he said because his dad had a minor defect in his hand when he was a young man, when he was born. And it didn't allow his dad to become a surgeon. And every time he practices surgery, he feels guilty because of what his dad had to give up for him. And what he's now been able to come. His dad was a factory worker for 30, 40 years. Yet his dad was a very intelligent man. He now is a professor in the hospital. And people began to share their stories. These are the most competent people, the most educated, smart people. They had their talents locked down, their knowledge locked down, their skills locked down. They could take responsibility medically, they could take action, but their emotions, experiences, and thoughts were still irreconciled to some of the current day experiences they have. So we try to go deep with this model. And so what I'm going to do today is we're looking at this issue of overcoming burnout and stress. And anyone read this story in the book of 3 John? It's about a guy called Gaius. John writes to him and says, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth, dear friend, I pray for you that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even if your soul is going along well. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth, telling you how to continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Gaius is a fantastic individual. He's written to you by his friend called John, and the first thing I want to point out is this. Your friends will ask you very different questions about how you feel than your colleagues or your acquaintances. He says, you're my friend. And because you're my friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health. I don't see anywhere else in the New Testament where that kind of sentiment is exchanged. Because often the Apostle Paul, who is the brain of the New Testament, is writing to parishioners or writing to churches in different parts of the Christian world in an attempt to get them to align themselves with Christ. Here is John writing to a friend. You know John's called the Apostle of Love. So here's the Apostle of Love writing to his friend and saying to him, my desire for you is not that you're brilliant, not that you cast out demons, not that you become excellent, not that you have knowledge in your ministry, or your people see your talent and your skills. He says, I'm praying that your experience might be one of health. I'm praying that your thoughts might be one of health. I'm praying that your emotions might be one of health. You see, the friend goes deeper than the colleague or the acquaintance. And it's very interesting. I won't go into this too much here. And I'll slip through these slides because they're not the most important because of our time. But this is what I want to suggest to us as we look at overcoming burnout and avoiding stress. Most of us, all of us in this room are searching for what we call the ideal self. All of us. And what happens with this is if we don't actually do the introspective work, the deep work of emotions, reconciling our emotions, reconciling our experiences, and reconciling and managing our thoughts, then actually this has a very negative effect in terms of how we do life. And what happens with us is simply this. This search for ideal self means that we're focused on the inner self and our inward goals. And don't forget, we're talking about overcoming stress and burnout. So what happens here, if you look at the book of James and you look through the New Testament, James talks about the church destroying itself. It doesn't talk about the devil destroying the church. If you look in the book of James, it says, if you resist the devil, he'll flee from you. So that's not a problem, James says. The problem is that you don't reconcile your experiences, emotions, and your thoughts. And that accumulates stress inside of us as individuals, because we're living well below our envisioned self. And so when we come into contact with other people, we come into contestation with them because they're living below their envisioned self, but we all hide it. And that is often the source of the beginning of our source of stress and our source of moving towards burnout. But what's interesting, and I'm focusing this particularly on church, but the principles can equally be extrapolated to your workplace or your family or anywhere else. When we have this inward ideal search for self, you get the slide, so you won't need to copy everything. What this search for self does, this inner self, this goal that we have inside of us, it leads us to one of two extremes. It leads us either to a striving for mastery or an avoiding for intimacy, or avoidance of intimacy. And what happens is simply this. Because sometimes we don't have the courage to face who we are, what we then use is our knowledge, our talents, our skills, our ability to respond and act to hide our emotions, our experiences, and our thoughts. So we focus disproportionately on our technical skills. And we avoid intimacy because they betray the reality of who we are. We're going to touch on this a bit later when I talk about ministry from behind the mask, or even working from behind the mask in any area. Our ideal search for self, if we don't manage it and subject it to Christ, is the source of the stress that we experience. Because what it does, it deviates us to either one of two extremes. Our striving for mastery means that we ignore our inward life, and ignoring our inward life means that we never get to that place where we can have that interaction that's meaningful and satisfying with the other person. And that fuels a lot of stress. So this inward search for ideal self already has its own level of stress. When you add that to trying to mask that stress with mastery, or trying to avoid intimacy so that the depth of who we are is not really known, then we can see how we begin to really get more stressed. And what happens is this. We begin to build a culture and an organization that inculturates all of this stuff. So instead of dealing with the three core themes of thought, emotion, and experience, our organizational values begin to develop around knowledge, skills, competencies, but we're all trying to strive for mastery, but avoiding intimacy. And that creates a lot of stress between us. And if you keep building stress on stress, it gets to the point where we burn out. We'll touch on that a bit later. And then it becomes enculturated. It becomes part and parcel of our organization. It becomes part and parcel of our families. It becomes part and parcel of our relationships. And that's quite difficult. So what happens now is this is our orientation. We start to live our lives, because we're searching for our deeper self, we start to live our lives orientated around one of these two extremes. Now, if we strive for mastery, our focus would be on work. Our focus would be on ministry. Our focus would be on things that we think will give us this mastery that helps us to feel better and to realize our ideal self. But actually, that's not possible. You'll see why in the next slide. If we focus on intimacy, if we avoid intimacy, we then neglect our personal lives. And that's why you can find people who are highly functional within their workplace, or even highly functional within the church, but they're relationally inept. Because this is fueling this and leading to this and this. And actually, it causes a lot of stress. The first thing I do when I meet somebody who tells me they're stressed, I ask them, how many things are you doing? Then I ask them, why are you doing them? And what you find out, they're doing a lot of things in order to compensate for their inner deprivation. the sense of inadequacy and incompetency that they feel, even with all the skills that they possess. That deep sense of feeling fulfilled is missing simply because they're searching for that ideal self, but they've actually not done the deep work inside of them that needs to be done. And then what happens with this diagram is simple. You start over here with the search for ideal self. You either go down one of two extremes, you and I. We either strive for mastery and focus on external stuff, work, or we avoid intimacy and neglects our personal life. And really it creates a life narrative, and we pass that narrative on to other people. And that narrative becomes part and parcel of what we live out. And then there's a cost for either our career or our personal life, our ministry and whatever else. And that becomes, again, where we focus most of our time and energy. We can correct this. And I'm moving through this quickly. We do spend a lot of time on this. And one of the ways that they suggest you can correct this is this. We need to come to terms with the awareness and acceptance of our dark side. This is where I think a lot of stress emerges from. It emerges from the disproportionate amount of time we spend trying to conceal what we don't want to reveal. And as a result, we spend less time in what I will call performance. i.e., we're so busy spending 70% of our time trying to make sure that people don't see the side of us that we don't want to see, that we've only got 30% energy on productivity or performance. This is particularly true for African and Caribbean and for women. If a woman is working in an environment where she's disproportionately, where there's more men in that environment than there are women, then that woman spends 60 to 70% on her time in what we call environmental scanning. She's making sure she's covered her back, she's dotted all the I's, she's crossed all the T's. She's doing that because she realizes that as a woman, all the men are going to be thinking that she shouldn't be there because it's not a place for the woman. The same is true of people that have disabilities, or people that are from African and Caribbean backgrounds, or people that have issues around particular sexualities. I'm not trying to get into the politics of sexuality, but that's what happens. What happens is that actually people spend disproportionate amount of time concealing what's inside, or managing the environment they're in because they're the minority in that environment. And what I suggest is this: we've got to come to terms with our dark side. Telling the truth about who we are frees us up to respond and to engage with other people from a place of generosity. And when we respond from a place of generosity, people reciprocate. When we respond from a place of concealment, then other people adopt the same disposition. And what happens is that we create a culture where nobody tells the truth. And that becomes even more stressful. Because it's a game and a dance that we're all playing, and we know we're playing the game, but nobody's willing to articulate it and name it explicitly. And therefore, managing the sensitivities around our interactions become increasingly problematic and unsustainable because they leak out in the end. So I always say to people, I'd rather tell you the truth about me. You don't have to work it out. Save that for somebody else. I'll tell you exactly how I am, and you just get on with the rest of the stuff. But we've got to come to terms with this dark side. We've got to come to terms with the fact that not everyone in this room is not 100% good. Everyone in this room has something that they don't want anyone else to know. Even in the past week, maybe in the past morning, maybe last night, there's something you don't want anybody else to know. And I'm not saying we should start making a kind of news of the world appeal and everybody listen. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is come to terms with the fact that there are things in you that God still needs to work on. And I often say to people, if sin wasn't as bad as it is, it wouldn't require Christ to take the steps that he took. Just look at what he did, and that should give you an indication of how serious this thing called sin is in our lives and in humanity. And so we've got to come to terms, because what this does, it helps us to regulate our vision of who we should be. And not to locate that vision in ourselves, but to locate that vision in Christ. And also, as we locate that ideal vision in Christ and we come to terms with the dark side, what it does is it extends to us a grace in our relationship with God and a generosity that we then extend to other people. And that takes away a lot of stress, particularly in church, because often in church we're focused all the time on performance. We might not say we are, but that's what it is. Can you lead worship well? Can you preach well? It's often about the observable stuff that we're focusing on. And that can be quite stressful. So, once we come to terms with our dark side, the next step is actually tempering mastery strivings to come to appreciate intimacy. How many of you, I'm not going to get you to put your hand, how many of you have really what I call intimate relationships with your work colleagues? How many have intimate relationships with your friends? And I don't mean the kind of intimacy where you'll, go take a holiday at the same time as summer and go away. I'm not talking about that kind of thing. Just where there's a range of emotions beyond professional competence, beyond skills, knowledge, talents, accent, and responsibility. Where is there a real exchange of experience, thoughts, and emotions? Often, when we haven't come to terms with this dark side, then actually these instinctive, competitive drives that exist within each of us begin to control and regulate our relationships. And they create pressure points. And those pressure points become stress.
Yes.
And if you keep building on those pressure points, I'll say again, they will become burnout. And we'll see that in a few moments. So we start to temper these mastery strivings. Remember, because we're searching for the ideal self, we're going for mastery, we're avoiding intimacy. Now we know what's going on inside of us and the kind of stress it brings on us and the stress it brings in our relationships. Actually, we begin to temper them. So our focus is less on mastering, for striving for mastery, but more on developing intimacy. And that intimacy brings us to a place where actually we don't have to be perfect in other people's eyes. We can just be who we are. Yeah. Now, this is not the typical approach to stress, but it's the approach that works. If you come to terms with yourself and you manage that, it will affect the way your relationships work, because you will know what belongs to you and what belongs to other people and what you need to take on board and what you don't. And then what will happen ultimately is simply this. We start to create a culture within our organizations that changes, within our families that changes, within our relationships that changes. And then we begin to reallocate time because we've focused on work, mastery, we've neglected personal life, friends, family, and then we start to reallocate our time so that we can come to terms with our own history and we can intervene in our children's history. So it's a legacy that we're talking about. It's something we pass on. It's something we pass on in teams, pass on in the workplace, and then the benefits are to career and personal life. So we'll come back to that in a few moments, but let's just quickly talk about stress in ministry. And again, this could work in your workplace. These are 12 areas of stress in ministry. The amount of work and the number of roles. Unrealistic expectations. Remember the ideal self? When you have a vision of your ideal self, then you try to perform and you work from a position of obligation. That's why some people in church can't say no. Because their ideal self feels diminished when they feel that they can't execute a task. And then they have too much on and they say, Pastor, I'm overloaded. Why did you take on the last task? Because your ideal self says, I'm superwoman. And this is true of women in particular. I was talking to a lady who said to me, she's got the ministry of helps. I said, fantastic. What does that mean? I do this, I do this, I do that. I said, I'm going to talk to you over lunch. We sat down for a while. And I tell you what transpired. Cutting a long story short. When I need to stop, let me know, please. I cut a long story short. It transpired that the lady had been sexually abused as a child. And that her performance, the search for ideal self in terms of worthiness, was projected outwards in terms of helpfulness. And so everything going she took on board and was stressed. But because she was superwoman in her own internal frame of reference, and in the reference in other people had on her, she couldn't say no to anything. So everybody said she's so wonderful and so available, but she was breaking. Because she hadn't dealt with the fracture, the fundamental violation that had taken place when she was a child that made her feel unworthy. And so the transaction of helping people made her feel more worthy than she actually felt. So I told her to drop every ministry that she's got in the church and discover a sense of worthiness in the presence of Jesus Christ. Do the inner work. Don't be lazy. Go deep down and ask, why am I doing so much in church when I know that it's not helpful for me? And it's not even helpful for the church, because you can't do all those roles simultaneously and give excellence. You can't. That's why even God in his own wisdom says, I'll give different people in the body gifts. So often our own stress, and I'm trying to relate this model to practicality, where we have multiple roles in church. I'm not saying you can't do more than one thing, but these multiple roles often are indicative of the fact that we're trying to wrestle with something in ourselves that we're stressed about, but we don't call it stress. And it actually affects other people that we come into contact with. Unrealistic expectations. I was talking to a leadership team in the church, and I was telling them, it's funny, in Exodus chapter 18, God is moving mightily. But if you look at Moses' ministry, it's not effective. Moses' ministry is not effective, it's not efficient, and it's not sustainable. Because his father-in-law says to him, you're doing from morning till night. The fact that God is moving is not evidence that your ministry is effective or efficient or sustainable. You've got to ask some serious questions about the expectations. I said Moses functioned out of obligation, and the people functioned from expectation. And the two would never be reconciled. That's why Moses was there from morning till night. When we function out the obligation, or obligation that we feel, or the expectation that other people place on us, it induces stress. And when we do that for long enough, we will get to a place of burnout. And we'll run through this very quickly. Dealing with conflict in different people. I was meeting with a pastor yesterday that I supervised. The pastor said to me, I feel suicidal. Then she said, no, I don't. I'm just taking on the feelings of everyone around me, because they keep giving me their feelings. And I said to her, look, we need to do weekly supervision. When you're serving people and they're telling you deep stuff that's going on in their life, there's counter-transference. You unconsciously internalize that stuff. And if you're not careful, it will form your framework, your psyche, your way of looking at the world. And before you know it, you feel like other people, even though it's not part of your reference point in terms of your personality. So you've got to look at unrealistic expectations, dealing with conflict, administration and finance. It goes on. And I won't go on through all of them. These are 12 areas of stress in ministry. And we can apply them to work in different ways, but I'm focusing on the church today. That's what we're dealing with. Managing change, multiple choices, lack of volunteers, work-life balance. That's what we dealt with earlier. Loneliness and isolation. How stressful is that when you're working all that you can for the church, but you go home and you're alone, you close the door, and it's just you with pie and chips? That's loneliness and isolation. We don't think about that. Some people perform so well for us that when they go home, it's their opportunity to cry behind closed doors. We've got to ask some serious questions. These are the two most common areas in ministry that are a burden for people: the amount of work and the roles of responsibility and the unrealistic expectations. Those are the pressure points for stress and burnout in ministry. I'm going to run through this quickly. I won't touch on this stuff. This is another area that gets us into drama in ministry. And it's called, I don't know if you ever come across, it's called the Cartman Drama Triangle. I'm throwing this stuff out quickly because we haven't got all day. But what they say is we adopt one of three positions. We're either the bully, we're the rescuer, or the victim. And they say the bully is, this person blames other people, criticizes, is dominating, it cuts others down, angry, resentful, rule-orientated, has all the rights while other people have none. Remember the ideal self. Normally the ideal self is based on our own narcissistic views of ourselves, our own perfect views of ourselves. That's why the bully has rules. Because if it has rules, then it can control everybody else. Some of us in church do this through speaking in tongues and quoting the Bible, by the way. The second one is the rescuer. The rescuer gains self-esteem by helping others. They try to be considerate and helpful. They feel the need to fix people's problems, and often feels like failure when other people's problems are not fixed. So you've got to ask yourself, these are stress points. If you're so boundary that you're not inflexible, you become a bully. And you create stress in yourself and in other people. If you're constantly rescuing people, then you're creating stress in yourself and in other people. And if you're a victim who feels hopeless, trapped, ashamed and guilty, seeks others to solve the problems and so on, then you're creating stress because a disproportionate amount of energy is being given towards you, and the imbalance in the team, in the fellowship, begins to manifest itself. So one of the ways we've got to manage our stress and avoid burnout is to pick the dramas we get involved in. You know, there are some dramas that are inevitable. There are just some that we like to be involved in, because we like to feel that we're important and we need to be everywhere at once. Time is up. Okay, I've run out of time. So, no problem. The slides are there, and they're self-explanatory. There's about 30 slides there, and you can use them. But when we was worshipping, I wasn't going to use the original one, but when I was worshipping, I just felt touch on this one, and I hope it's been helpful. So.
Right, we've got time for some questions.